Hello, my name is Caden. Today we are working in the beautiful new FL Studio 12, and I'm going to show you how to produce a chill step track, making some use of some great tools like 3os and Fruity Convolver. This series will start out simple and continue to build as we go along. To begin, I'm starting with the basic starter template. This template is empty with the exception of the 4 starter drum sounds. I'll be using these sounds to make the basis of our beat. I'm a drummer, so when I start a song, I usually start with the drums. For the basic beat, I want a 4-bar pattern written in half time. I'll start with the bass drum. When I move to the clap sound, you can see that the bass drum notes are still visible. That's because I have ghost channels enabled. I like this feature specifically for building beats across multiple instrument channels. To save time, I'm going to copy and paste the clap pattern to the snare. Here's what that sounds like. The drum sounds in the default template are already assigned to the mixer, so I don't need to assign them. However, I do want to create a drum submix for the purpose of adding FX later. To do this, I'm going to select an empty channel and the 4 drum sounds by holding Ctrl and Shift and clicking on the drum channels. Right-click on the empty channel, navigate to Track Routing, and select Create Submix. I'm going to give this submix the name Drums and select a color and hit Enter. Now the drums are routed to my submix channel and can be controlled as a group. Great. Now I want a bass synth sound to accompany the bass drum. I'm going to open the plugin picker using the forward mouse button on my multi-button mouse. If you don't have a multi-button mouse, you can press the F8 key on your keyboard. I'm going to drag 3os to a new channel. I want a bass sound that has a rattle to it. I think that sounds good. I want to make some changes to our bass sound so it has a nice decay when released. To do this, I'm changing the envelope curve located in the wrapper. I want to hear what that bass sounds like with the drums, so I'm going to add the drum pattern to the playlist. Let's rename and color this pattern to help us keep track of it. Now I'm going to copy the bass drum pattern to 3os. Unfortunately, the decay on the bass sound is giving us some unpleasant distortion when the notes are rapidly played, so we're going to have to sample it. To do this, we need to assign the sound to the mixer. Now I want to add Edison into the effects chain. Arm Edison to record and make sure it is set to start recording on input. I'll play a low C sharp. Using the wheel on my mouse, I'm going to zoom in and select the quiet at the start of the sample and delete it. Now hit Ctrl-A to select the entire sample and open Tools and select Normalize. Now the sample is at its max possible volume without peaking. To play this sample, I want to drop it into Direct Wave. To make sure our sound plays correctly, right-click on the keyboard to move the root note to the note of the sample. The C sharp sounds great, but I'm concerned some higher notes may be too distorted, so I'm going to make a new sample. Ideally, you would create a series of samples every couple of notes to keep the most accurate sound, but I'm just going to stick to the one sample, and any distortion we get later will just be character. However, I do want my two main notes, C sharp and G sharp, to be fairly accurate, so I'm going to sample E because it's about halfway in between. Again, I'll arm Edison and play the note. I didn't stop that pattern in time, but that's okay. I'll just edit out the first hit. And again, I will normalize this sample, drag it to Direct Wave, and set the root note to E. Great. Now I'm going to set Direct Wave to output to the same track as the 3-Os we made the sample with. I want the bass to play in unison with the bass drum, so I'm going to copy the bass drum pattern and paste it to Direct Wave. The bass drum pattern as is causes the notes to be cut, so I'll stretch out these notes so that they touch. Now the bass notes sustain, but don't distort each other. I'm not completely happy with this sound. I think it needs more bite. So I'm going to add the Fruity Blood Overdrive FX and crank up the preamp on it. With the distortion, I think the buzz of the bass is a little too hot, so I'll move the filter a little to cut some of the high end. Now let's hear the bass and drums together. think that's good, so I'm going to name the bass pattern. Now I think we can start building out our patterns in the playlist. I'm going to use the Paint tool to create more instances of basic beat. I'll start to do the same with the bass, but I want the second and fourth bass patterns to play a different note, so I will use the pattern menu to make the second bass pattern unique. In this new unique pattern, I'm going to select and move the bass notes from C sharp to G sharp, and then create a new G sharp pattern at the end of our phrase. I want to hear what that sounds like. Sounding good, but I don't want the bass drum stepping on the bass synth as much, so I'm going to use the envelope control to shorten and thin it out a bit. Okay, I think it's time to add in some FX on the master channel to fatten this sound up a bit. I'm going to add EQ, Maximus, and Sound Goodizer. On the EQ, I want to set band 1 to a steep high pass at about 25 Hz, and then create a slight boost and from there to about 100 Hz. This will help make our bass punchy. With Maximus, I'm going to set the low band cutoff at about 100 Hz and the high band at about 2000 Hz. This again will help keep our bass punchy and not let it distort our other sounds as much. Another thing I like to do with Maximus is set the mid and high bands to a slight stereo separation and keep the bass more merged. Now, with Sound Goodizer, I don't want it set too high. I just want to give me a little compression and a lift in the high end. Yeah, I think that sounds good. Okay, now I'm going to move the patterns around in the playlist a little and set them up for building the rest of the song. For the opening, I want a more simple drum part that is just the bass, so I'm going to use the Make Unique command again. And again, I want to change the last drum part to make a little fill to lead into the next section. I'll copy the clap part to the snare, and we'll see what that sounds like. With that, we've completed the first section of this tutorial. In the next video, we will begin to build out some synth sounds and further sculpt this track using some impulse responses and Fruity Convolver. Thanks for watching. Welcome back for round 2 of our Chill Step tutorial. In the first video, we create a beat with some variations and an aggressive sampled bass synth sound, so now we need to add some lighter elements to take this beat and begin to build it out into a song. First off, I think this beat would benefit from piano accompaniment. However, this piano is dry and not very interesting, so we must fix that. I think convolution reverb is a must, but I don't really feel like the default reverb sample is right for the piano. In the browser, there's an impulse section. FL Studio comes armed with a bunch of great pre-built impulse responses. I think this big spacey warehouse sound will be great. For the piano part, I'm going to load in a pre-built score I made. You can drag in any MIDI file onto a channel to add the score. If you have a score you would like to save, you can navigate to the piano roll menu, File, Export as MIDI file. Alright, let's give the piano a listen. Sounds okay, but it isn't as odd as I would really like it to be. You can drop a lot of sounds into Convolver that aren't impulse responses and get some interesting results. I'm going to use Edison to slice up a sample of rain and thunder I made and see what that does in Convolver. I'll turn off Convolver so it doesn't distract us. I'm zooming in with the mouse wheel to make sure I grab an area right where the sample crosses 0 so we don't have any unwanted clicking in the sample. I'll copy the selected region, select all, and press delete, then paste the part I want back in. Now we can switch to the volume curve and have our sample fade out. Let's drop this sample on Convolver and see what it does. Turn the first convolver back on. I think this needs some EQ to cut some of the booming low end. We can also mess with the EQ line and convolver to change which frequencies are affected most. Yeah, I think that's good. This piano now has a darker, irregular sound, and I think that's much more interesting. Alright, now I want to add the piano to the playlist with our beat and see what that sounds like together. But first, I'm going to change the grid resolution on the playlist and slice off part of the pattern, so the ending only occurs every other time. I think that works well. The patterns complement each other, but the sounds don't get in each other's way. Okay, now here's where we get to the fun part. To create the basis of our main synth sound, I'm going to start with 3 Os. In fact, I'm going to make a sound very similar to the bass sound we created in the first video, but the oscillator tuning will be a little different. And just like I did with the piano part, I'm going to add an arpeggiated score to save some time. And just like the piano, this sound is flat, so we need to make it more interesting. Chorus and reverb are a good place to start. I'm going to grab another one of these large chamber impulses for convolver. Now I'm going to add EQ and distortion to thin out the sound. You can hear how that made the reverb trail really sparkle. And that's what I'm really interested in. So I'm going to add a Reverb 2 unit to really emphasize this part. Yeah, this gives us some great overtones. I'm going to make a few more edits with EQ, and I think we'll be ready to go. So what I want to do now is add Edison to the end of the effects chain and record a series of samples where the reverb progressively builds. Now with Edison armed to record, I will selectively start and stop the arpeggiated pattern. Great. I'm going to zoom in and select just the reverb tail of this first section of our new recording. I'm pleased with this, so we need to place it somewhere we can easily play it. I think Direct Wave will be perfect for this task. Now we can just drag our selection into the zone area of Direct Wave. By default, Direct Wave sets the sample to be scaled across the keyboard, and that's not really what I want here. I just want one key to activate this one sample, and then another key to activate a different sample. To make these changes, I'm going to drag the handle at either end of the sample zone and drag them in so that the zone only covers one key. Then I'll use the right click to move the root note to that same key so our sample doesn't get transposed when we play it. Perfect. Now all we have to do is repeat this task for the remaining regions in our recording. Now that we have all the samples loaded in, let's hear what they sound like together. For the most part, these are great, but some of the samples have a little click at the beginning. To fix this, I'm going to change the attack time very slightly using the ADSR fader. There, no more clicks. Now, we need to repeat this entire process again, but with our next chord. Let's sped up the video for time and convenience. Alright, now let's hear what all our samples sound like together. Pretty good, but that last sample still has a little bit of the original sound at the beginning, so I'll need to fix that. Okay, now we have our synth sound, and it's time to build a pattern out of it. Whoops, it seems like I started this pattern in the wrong place. No problem, I'll just move it down. There we go. I'm pleased with how this is sounding. I'm just going to add another EQ, delay, and reverb to smooth out the note transitions and give the sound a little bounce. I think that's great. Now it's time to hear our new synth sound with our track, and that will conclude this video. In the next video, I'll show you how I would progress a track using break and fill leading into a new section of a song. Welcome to round 3 of this Chill Step tutorial. In the previous video, we added some custom synth components to our track, and it really began to sound like a song. To finish off this trilogy, we need to see how we can progress this track from the first part to a new part at a different energy level. To do this, we will change some of the background textural elements and our beat. When writing, I like to think about the different parts of my song as being in different colors. The first part, which is usually the lower energy part, is blue to me, and the second, more energetic part, is red. I'm going to continue the main synth part on from our first section, but I'm going to create a new beat and bass. Starting with the bass drum, I want something that is aggressive but still open and related to the accents of our main pattern. Here, I like to utilize the select and hold feature of the piano roll to quickly duplicate notes. I also think it is fun to play with the notes of the percussion elements to transform their sounds further. Let's listen to how the new beat is sounding. Good, but the hi-hat is a little too far out in front, so I'm going to change its velocity a little using the right mouse button so as to keep them all uniform. With the new pattern named, we'll lay it out in the playlist. I want the bass synth to follow the same pattern as the bass drum, just like in the first part, so I'll copy the bass drum rhythm and lengthen the note so we get good sustain.
Now I'm going to make a unique copy of our bass synth so I can create the G sharp pattern. Just like copying notes in the piano roll, I can select and hold to copy these patterns. Let's hear what that sounds like. Awesome. Now I want some kind of pad element to help build out the foundation a little. Citrus and the Ambient 2 preset should work well here. I'm going to stagger these notes on the held chord so they don't all end at once. Pads are blue to me, so that's the color I'll make this pattern. This pad is really rich, and I don't want it to interfere with the sparkle of our main synth or the punch of our bass, so adding EQ with both high pass on band 1 and low pass on band 7 will help thin it out. The sound also has a rise in the low mid, so I'll try and cut that as well. And this may come as a surprise, but I think we need some reverb. This smooths out the swell a little and adds to the sustain of the sound. Let's hear this all together now. It's okay, but I feel like the pad is really pulling the energy of this section down. To fix this, I think we can turn this into a rhythmical pad using Gross Beat. Using the default preset, let's audition some of these volume envelopes. I like the Saw Gate 1. Alright, all together again. Much improved. Okay, so the next problem to deal with is how do we get from part 1 of our song to part 2? I can't have these two sections right up against each other, so I need a break and build or fill section as a transition. This will make the change in energy levels more pleasant to the listener. To do this, I want a 4-bar section of space to build in between the two parts. The first sample of our main synth has kind of a siren-like quality to me, so I think I'll begin by making a very simple quarter note pattern. I want the third pattern to be a little different, so I will make it unique and add another sample in addition. I think that will work. And of course, these patterns need to keep in line with our color theme. Now, the rhythm for this part needs to be an energy level up from everything else, so I'm going to write it at regular time instead of half time, like the rest of the rhythms so far. The claps will keep in time with our normal 2 and 4 snare hits, while the snare is going to play something a little more syncopated. The hat will play a mostly straight ahead 8th note pattern. Mostly. Okay, I think that sounds good, so I'll name this pattern. Now, unlike all the bass patterns before, this pattern will not be in unison with the bass drum, and this will help give us the drop into the next section. I wrote this pattern high thinking it would really set it apart, but I'm curious as to how it will sound an octave down. No, I don't really think that works well, so let's take it back up. Alright, let's see how this fill is sounding. Close, but I don't really like how a couple of these notes are cut. I'll fix that right quick. Much improved. Now I'm not totally thrilled with the beat. It just doesn't have as much build as I would like, but rather than spend a ton of time working out a complex rhythm, I think I can improve this section with gross beat. I'm familiar with using patterns complex 11 and complex 6 as fills, so I know I'll want these in succession. To automate gross beat, I'm going to start with the empty pattern. Right-click and select Create Automation Clip. This will create an automation curve the length of our song. To change the curve, I'm right-clicking on the curve to make a control point. Then I right-click on the point again and set it to hold. This makes the control points like stair steps. Now, to make sure my curve is accurate for the pattern I want, I will select Pattern Complex 11 in gross beat and right-click, and then select Copy Value. Now I can right-click on the control point and select Paste Value. I will do the same for the next control point in the Complex 6 pattern. While I'm at it, I think I want the bass synth to be affected by gross beat the same way, so I will add gross beat to its effects chain and right-click on the pattern selector and select Link to Controller. From this pattern, we can select the gross beat automation curve as the internal controller, meaning this instance of gross beat will be controlled by the same automation curve as the previous gross beat. It is important here to make sure remove conflicts is not checked, or it will disable the connection between the automation curve and the gross beat effects on the drum beat. Well, as it turns out, I didn't like the bass synth being glitched by gross beat, so I'll disable it. Perfect. I think this film makes for a great lead into our second part. I want to add a little lead in that just features the main synth line. And with that, I think all that's left to do is listen to what we've created. In this video, we're going to concentrate on beat making. To start us off, I already have a synth score loaded in for us to make a beat to. This is what it sounds like. To me, this melody is really fun and bouncy, so I want a beat that is bouncy as well to complement it. I've already chosen some sounds that we'll be working with. Let's give them a listen. In addition to the 4 new sounds, I will also be making use of the 4 standard template drum sounds. The melody is made of 16th notes, but has a triplet emphasis. I want the bass drum to mirror these accents. When starting a beat, I usually begin just by placing notes, because I already have a good idea of what they will sound like in my head. But I'm a drummer, and not everyone thinks about beats like I do. So I know many people who like to have the beat play over and over on repeat while they work and manipulate notes. This gets a little maddening to me, so I choose not to work like that. This hat sound has some great artifacts when played at lower notes. I would encourage you to play with the sound notes and not always take sounds at their face value. This will make your rhythms more varied and interesting. I already have my bass drum sound the way I like it, but because I planned for this beat to be really syncopated, I want this heavier sound to emphasize the downbeat of every measure. Much like in my previous video, I want this beat to have a halftime beat, so where I would normally place the clap sound on beats 2 and 4, I will instead place it on beats 3 of both measures. Finally, this higher pitch hit sound will be to fortify the claps and accent the 3 and 4 and of our last measure. Let's give the beat a listen. Great, now let's hear it with the melody. Very cool. This will make for a good beginning or intro beat. What really makes the drums interesting in a song is their ability to progress the energy of the song. To do this, I usually layer parts. Typically, I will have my beginning part, which I think of as the blue or cool part, and then I will have my warm red part. When building these two parts, it's very important that they continue to follow along the same basic pattern and accents, otherwise they will feel more like they conflict than build. Another thing I like to be mindful of when building a beat is to not have too many sounds overlap. I think this is because I'm a drummer and I tend to build beats like I would if I was playing a set, and there's a limitation to how many sounds I can physically play at once. Now we need to hear what our A and B rhythm parts sound like together. So, you can see how the B rhythm is really building off of and adding to the A part. That's what you want when building a beat. If I build a pattern that has more of a 4 to the floor feel as the B part and try to place it over the A part, the two would conflict. I'll show you what I mean. No good. If you wanted more of a driving quarter note beat, both patterns would need to change. I had a friend tell me once that no one cares what the drums do as long as it's in time. I don't really agree. I think you can get away with doing almost anything with your beats as long as you stick to a style or rule once you set it. So this groove is something I built off the top of my head, but I'm really comfortable with making beats. So what if you're less familiar with making beats? FL Studio has some great tools to get you more familiar with how to lay out sounds. Here I've loaded SliceX with a fun loop from the browser. FL Studio comes with a good starter group of loops, and you can find many more online. The loop I've loaded has very basic slicing to indicate the start of each measure. Because of this, it will only play correctly in the original tempo, which happens to be 128 BPM. This means if I change the tempo, the loop will continue to play at its normal tempo, but then there will be a silent gap until the start of the next slice. We need this loop to be sliced a little better so that all of its elements will be triggered in time no matter what we set the project tempo to. This is a very clean loop, so we can use the auto slicing button. This will place a slice marker at the beginning of every transient. It will also create a score in the piano roll matching the rhythm of the original loop. Now, if we play a slower tempo, the loop plays correctly. If we look at the piano roll, we can see the basic rhythm of the loop, but it doesn't give us any indication as to what the sound is that's being played, which doesn't make recreating the beat much easier. A cool trick we can use is to drag the loop from SliceX onto the piano roll, which will paint the waveform on the background, much like when we have ghost notes enabled. Now we can easily see how to lay out a beat similar to this loop. The big spikes are the bass drum, so let's lay that in. What's hard to see is the snare hits because they are covered up by the bass drum, but we can hear where they are, so we'll place those on beats 2 and 4. The smaller peaks in the loop are some kind of tom sound. I don't have a tom sound loaded, but I think I can come close by placing some higher pitched bass drum sounds. I'm having some difficulty placing these last couple of sounds. That's because they are triplets and the piano roll grid spacing isn't set up for those. To change this, click on the Snap to Grid icon in the upper left corner and set it to a 1/6 beat grid. Now we can place these kicks correctly. Now when we play these two together, we can use the mixer to switch between our new beat in the loop to see how well we have replicated the rhythm. Once you're happy with the rhythm, you can drop in other sounds over the original drums and further develop the sound your project needs. Using SliceX, the piano roll can and will help you greatly improve your familiarity with making and remaking some of your favorite beats. In this video, we will be working on vocals. Specifically, I want to show you some of the great tools in FL Studio that allow you to manipulate recorded vocal tracks and transform them into some of the more creative sounds like you hear in many genres. The vocal track I will be working with today is a loop I purchased from the FL Studio content library. This is what it sounds like.
We'll step into the light, break into paradise.
Now we could begin talking about EQ and reverb and how these tools are used to mold vocals, but I tend not to treat vocals any different than I would other sounds when working with these tools, so I will focus more on tools that are meant to be more specific to altering vocals. First up, we have a plugin called Pitcher. Not to be confused with Patcher, which is used to create complex FX chains, Pitcher is a perfect pitch machine and harmonizer.
We'll step into the light, break into paradise.
Pitcher analyzes incoming signals much in the same way a guitar tuner does, and then it corrects the pitch to the note the signal is closest to. This by default smooths out all the variations in the tone, giving it that robotic sound. At one point, this was referred to as the share effect. In the note section, you can enable and disable notes if you know they are not part of the key you are working in, and this will keep Pitcher from picking notes incorrectly if the input is too far sharp or flat. If you enable MIDI mode at the bottom, you can see the note section of Pitcher goes dark. This is because the auto analyzer part is disabled. Pitcher is basically in bypass until we supply it with some note information. You can do this with a MIDI keyboard or the MIDI out plugin in FL Studio. To connect the MIDI out plugin to Pitcher, set the output to a port number. This is an internal port number to FL Studio, so you can set it to anything you like as long as nothing else in your project is using that port. Now make sure Pitcher is set to the same port as the MIDI out. Now I can play the MIDI out with my keyboard and the vocals are adjusted to whatever note I play.
We'll step into the light, break into paradise. We'll step into the light, break into paradise.
At the moment, the vocals get really hollow and open mouth sounding when I play lower notes. Turn on the format option to fix this problem.
We'll step into the light, break into paradise.
This is how some hip-hop and R&B singers get their signature sound. So what if you want your vocals to have harmonies? Then it's time to press the Harmonize button. This basically switches Pitcher from a monophonic mode to a polyphonic mode. To demonstrate, I'm going to load in a save score containing a chord progression. The chords I loaded in are not in the same key as the original vocal part, so I'm going to leave this switch in the lower left corner set to replace. Mix would be useful if you wanted to preserve the original notes of the recorded vocals and add a harmony on top of it. Let's see what this combination sounds like.
We'll step into the light, break into paradise. We'll step into the light, break into paradise.
Well, unfortunately, the high note in this vocal track is at a break or flip point for Pitcher, and it can't decide which octave to adjust it to. To fix this, we need to alter the notes of the vocal track, but Pitcher isn't the tool for this job. Enter New Tone. Once loaded, you have to drag your vocal track into New Tone to be analyzed. Longer recordings will take longer to load into New Tone because of this. After the analysis is complete, we can see where all the parts of our vocal track fall on a keyboard. This is a very cool feature because if you decided you wanted to create a synth or piano part with the same melody as the vocal part, all you have to do is have New Tone analyze it, select the pattern where you want the melody, and then press the Send to Piano Roll button. Very cool. Alright, so when beginning in New Tone, there are some basic tools to be aware of that can save you a lot of headache. The first is the center knob. The center knob forces all parts in New Tone to move to the closest note. This fixes the average pitch of every note. You can see how the second to last note really moves when I turn the center knob.
We'll step into the light, break into paradise.
The second control is the variation knob. This controls how much the note is allowed to vary from the adjusted note. By turning this all the way up, we get a sound very similar to the perfect pitch sound in Pitcher. When I turn this knob, you can see how all the lines straighten out.
We'll step into the light, break into paradise. We'll step into the light, break into paradise.
So if we want to change a note, all we have to do is click and drag that section to a new note. I'll demonstrate by pulling the problem notes from before down a little bit.
Break into paradise.
Alright, now I'll drag our adjusted sound to the playlist and disable the original. Now we can set the track output of our new vocal sound to the same track as the original, and we'll see how it sounds with Pitcher.
step into the light. Break into paradise.
Wonderful. We no longer have the flipping octave problem from before. A really awesome feature of Pitcher is using the voice panning sliders to widen the sound by panning the different notes of the chord.
We'll step into the light. Break into paradise. We'll step into the light.
I apologize for some of the glitching. That's largely due to the variation restriction from NuTone. Spending more time working with each note would remove these glitches. NuTone gives us more than just control over pitch. It can also allow us to change the timing of words as well. For example, the end of this first phrase starts on the for-and of the first measure, but that may not work well with the cadence of the rest of my song. I may rather this note happen right on the first downbeat of measure 2. To fix this, all we have to do is grab the left edge of this note and drag it to the right. This has our note starting at the right time, and it also automatically stretches the previous note so we don't have a vacant space in our vocal track.
We'll step into the light. Break into paradise.
Keep in mind, when making these types of changes, you can really only make subtle changes because it will cause distortion in the track that may be unwanted. Now, if I try to make the same adjustment to the note on measure 4, I don't get the same results. This is because the editor is set to snap to a 1/4 beat grid, and any movements are by a quarter beat regardless of where they start. For this note, we need to go to the Tools and Snap to Grid and change the snap to off. Now we can move this note by any amount.
We'll step into the light. Break into paradise.
Time is not the only thing we can snap notes to. The Tools menu gives us another interesting option, and that is Snap to Scale. Now we can select the scale we want to work in from any of the major or minor scales in the scales list. Once a scale is selected, if we move a note, we can see the note automatically snaps to the notes within the specified scale. If we want to adjust all the notes of our scale, click and drag to select them all and move them a little, and we see they all pop to fit the new scale.
We'll step into the light. Break into paradise.
Last couple of tools that are really important to be aware of are the Cut Mode and Advanced Mode buttons. Sometimes the analysis of the track doesn't quite break up the notes as well as it should. To fix this, use the Cut Mode button to slice a note where the changes are most significant.
Break into paradise.
Advanced Mode gives you an entire set of graphical tools on selected notes. This allows you to control the volume, fade in, fade out, as well as control the note ramp in, ramp out, and note variation for each note independently. This really gives you the power to shape every note of the performance. That about wraps up this video. In the next video, we'll talk about vocoding. Welcome back to round 2 of working with vocals. There is one other effect that is really different from all the others, and that is vocodex. Vocodex is a vocoder, and to use it, we need a more complex signal path for our vocal track. I'm going to start by disabling the vocal track routing to the master and instead route it to the next track to the right. Also, we need to make sure Pitcher is disabled so it doesn't conflict.
We'll step into the light. Break into paradise.
Now we can add vocodex to track 6.
We'll step into the light.
In order for this to work correctly, we need to turn down the routing signal from the vocal track to 0, so only the signal information comes through, but no audio. Vocoding requires two parts to work, a carrier and a modulator. Sidechaining the vocal and setting the mod part of vocodex to 1 makes the vocal the modulator. Now we need a carrier. Citrus has some pre-built patches specifically for using with vocodex. After assigning Citrus to track 7, we need to sidechain it to track 6, just like our vocal part. You can do this by right-clicking on the arrow at the bottom of the track and selecting sidechain to this track only. This will remove all other outgoing connections from track 7. I'll copy the chord progression from MIDI out and paste it into Citrus. Oh, I just about forgot. Now we need to set the car section of vocodex to input 2. Now the sound from Citrus is set as the carrier in vocodex. Let's give that a listen.
We'll step into the light. Break into paradise.
That really didn't work as well as I would like. Vocodex doesn't like for many tonal variations to exist in the modulator. This is part of what makes it interesting to use on things like drum beats. Try setting up vocodex to use a drum loop as the carrier sound. Alright, I'll go back to new tone and set our vocal part to be very monotone. Drag out the new vocal part and let's see how that works.
We'll step into. We'll step into the light. Break into paradise.
Interesting. I think this would work better if we move the notes in Citrus an octave up.
We'll step into the light. Break into paradise. We'll step into the light. Break into paradise. We'll step into the light. Break into paradise. step into the light. Break into paradise. We'll step into the light. Break into paradise. We'll step into the light. Break into paradise.
Much improved. I think this can still be better, so I'm going to further change our chord progression.
We'll step into the light. Break into paradise. We'll step into the light.
Okay, now if you really want to change up the sound of your vocoder, all you have to do is change the sound of your synth and see how it affects your vocals.
We'll step into the light. We'll step into the light. We'll step into the light. Break into paradise. We'll step into the light. Break into paradise. We'll step into the light. Break into paradise. We'll step into the light. Break into paradise.
One thing to keep in mind, if you want to add effects like EQ before the Vocodex plugin, it isn't going to do anything,
We'll step in.
because at that point the track is not processing any audio information, only the signal path information.
We'll
Any effects before Vocodex and the signal path must take place on either the carrier or modulator track before they are routed.
step into the light. Break into paradise. We'll step into the light. Break into paradise. We'll step into the light. Break into paradise.
An important thing to realize about these FX is you don't have to choose one or the other. If you route the vocals to another track, you can add Pitcher and have it harmonize the vocals in addition to the vocoder. This can be a good option if you want to bring out more definition in the consonants of the vocals and make the words a little more intelligible.
We'll step into the light. Break into paradise. We'll step into the light. Break into paradise. We'll step into the light. Break into paradise.
Have fun playing with Newtone, Pitcher, and Vocodex. In this video, we're going to be using FL Studio to make a multi-track recording. Before we can begin recording, we need to check some audio settings. Navigate to Options and Audio Settings in the upper left menu. In the Devices drop-down, make sure to have some form of ASIO device selected. FL Studio will not be able to record using the standard sound card driver. Some sound cards and audio interface developers have their own ASIO driver. With the release of FL Studio 12, there is now an FL ASIO driver. I'm using my mobile rig today, so I'm just going to be using ASIO for All driver. If you click to show the ASIO panel, you will see the available devices you can use. I'm using a 2-channel USB interface, so it is enabled currently. If you need to access more advanced options like latency control, you can click on the wrench icon. Everything is set like I want it, so I'll close the panel. Today I'm recording drums. Drums are almost always recorded with multiple tracks at once. You can go crazy if you like and mic every drum independently, so long as your audio interface has support for it. Because I only have 2 inputs, I will be recording using a technique similar to the Glyn Johns technique. I have one mic on the kick drum, another beside my low tom facing towards my snare and hi-hat. To cover the overhead, I will be using a field recorder, and I'll import its audio later. To set up FL Studio to record, we will be working with the mixer. Pick a track you wish to record through and click on the input drop-down. The bass is going to be on my input 1, so I will select it. Perfect. Now select another track and pick an input for it to record. Sounding good. If you have more inputs, you will need to activate the inputs on more tracks. I want to make sure my drumming is in time with this project, so I will make sure the metronome is on and the project tempo is set to the speed I want. Another thing to be mindful of when recording is once you stop, the input tracks will disarm, so you'll need to rearm them for recording in between each take by clicking on the circles at the bottom of the tracks to turn them red. With that, I think we're ready to go. Arm the project for recording, and it will ask how you want to record. I want to record audio into the playlist as audio clips, so I'll select that option. Once pressed, we get the count in, and away we go. After recording is finished, we can begin to work our newly recorded audio files. I'll drop in the audio from the field recorder so I can line it up to the other 2 recordings. The field recorder was started earlier than FL Studio, so there's more quiet space at the start of the recording. We can easily click and drag on the edge of the audio file to cut this away. Now I want to zoom in on the audio so I can be really precise with the alignment. If not, I may have an unwanted delay or phasing problem. To move this track where it needs to be, I need to change the playlist snap option to none. Now I can easily place this track where it needs to be. Looks great. Let's hear it. Sounds good to me. One thing you may have noticed is our recorded files do not play back through the same track they were recorded on. We'll have to assign them to a vacant track. I'll start with the bass drum mic, then the low tom mic, and the overhead last. Now that I have these sounds in the mixer, I want to group them into a submix, much like we did in the first video. Now the drums can be controlled as a group. I want to concentrate mostly on the middle section of the recording. When recording with multiple mics at once, phasing is something to be aware of. This deals with how the signals from each track interact with each other. If 2 tracks are out of phase, they will compete and weaken the sound. You can hear this most in the low end. Let's hear how the bass drum mic and low tom mic interact when I switch the phasing on the low tom mic. You can hear how the bass gets bigger and more aggressive sounding when I swap the phase of the low tom mic. I like this sound much better. Another thing I'm concerned with is spillover of different sounds on the mics. When we listen to just the bass drum, you can hear the hi-hat and snare. I only want the bass drum on this mic, so we need to filter the higher frequencies out. I'll do this using an EQ with band 7 set to a steep low pass. Similarly, I only want high frequencies coming through on my overheads, so I'll do the same to it, except this time setting band 1 to high pass. This means I'm relying on the low tom mic for most of the meat of this sound. I will dampen the highs and lows a little, but not much. All together now. This gives us a good punchy drum sound and allows us to better mix some of the different elements. Most drums you hear have loads of compression on them and a noise gate. To accomplish this, you can use Fruity Limiter or Maximus. I prefer Maximus because the high, mid, and low EQ bands can be processed independently. You can spend a lot of time with a compressor refining your sound, but if you're just getting started, I would recommend starting with one of the presets and then modifying it to fit your taste. Let's audition some of these presets. I think Breakbeat Slam was my favorite. Yeah, I like that it makes the drums very live sounding without coming off as being overly processed. You know what would make this sound better? Reverb. I'll add Fruity Convolver, but again, the main sound isn't right for this job. In the impulse section, I'm going to grab one of the small to medium room sounds. Yeah, this adds a good feeling of space to the drum sound. So when working these drums into a track with other instruments and sounds, I'm going to stay concerned with the bass drum and making sure it stays full and punchy sounding. This can be a problem if you lay in another heavy bass sound. I'll show you what I mean with Solar. It's not the best bass line, but it'll do for our purposes. I'll lay this bass pattern in so we can hear what it sounds like with the drums. That just made the bass drum muddy sounding. I have a cool trick for fixing this kind of problem. Let's assign Sour to a free track and EQ it a little to take out some of the harshness. Now, add Fruity Peak Controller to the bass drum track. The Peak Controller creates a control curve based on the audio information on the applied track. I'll solo the bass drum with right-click so you can really see what I mean. We can't hear the bass drum because by default, Peak Controller mutes the track. Uncheck mute to correct this. Now we can see the Peak Controller draws peaks right in time with our bass drum hits. Now, to make use of this, I'll unmute everything using the right mouse button again and select Sour's track and open the EQ. Right-click on the first volume slider in the EQ panel and select Link to Controller. From this window, we can select the Peak Control as our controller. Here's where things get a little more tricky, and we have to do a little math. I don't want the volume control to follow the default input curve. If it did, the volume of the bass synth would go up with each bass drum hit. I want the slider to start at its 50% mark and decrease with the bass drum hits. To do this, I'll change the mapping formula to read 0.5 minus input and hit enter. Now, let's give our song a listen. We can very clearly see the bass synth ducking in volume with each bass drum hit, and we can hear the bass drum stays punchy and full. You can accomplish this same task by sidechaining with Fruity Limiter. First, sidechain the bass drum to the bass synth, like we did with the vocoder earlier, and add Fruity Limiter to the bass synth effects chain. On the Compressor tab, there's a sidechain selector. Set it to 1. Now we can set the threshold and ratio for the compressor, and when the bass drum plays, it will compress the bass synth. Very cool, but I still think I prefer the Peak Controller. Thanks for watching. In this last video, I'm going to show you a couple more advanced recording techniques and tools. I started with the drum beat from the previous video and recorded a guitar part to accompany it. Let's give the combo a listen. think that has a kind of fun garage band sound. To produce this sound, I start with a clean guitar track. The amp track was actually recorded later. Here's what the original guitar track sounds like. Much in the same way, we record the audio in using the drop-down at the top of the track's effects chain. We can send audio out from a track using the out drop-down at the bottom of the effects window. It does not display well in this mode because I do not have ASIO drivers selected, but if your audio interface has separate addressable outputs, you will find them here. So why would I choose to record my guitar this way? Many guitarists will simultaneously record a clean track of their guitar. This is so they can make non-destructive edits to their sound during a project. If you only record the sound coming from the guitar amp, then you are stuck with that sound unless you want to record the part over. With a copy of the raw guitar sound, you can play the guitar back out of FL Studio through your audio interface or sound card and back into your amp to be re-recorded. However, to do this correctly, you need another piece of equipment called a reamp box, which is basically a direct box in reverse. The reamp box takes the line-out signal of your audio interface and converts it back into a signal impedance like your guitar and stomp boxes. This process can be used for more than just guitar amplifiers though. You could use this same process to set up a speaker in a hall or stairway and record practical audio effects of your sound in a real space. Other reasons to keep a clean sound of your guitar is so you can use the effects bundled in FL Studio to create your own sounds. This may be useful in working out ideas if working with an amp is not feasible due to noise restrictions. First effect I would check out is Fruity Fast Dist. I like Fast Dist because it gives you a graphical representation of how it alters a sound wave. Next effect that is a must to check out is Hardcore. Hardcore is a virtual stomp box pedal board. On the board you can have up to 5 pedals active, as well as make use of the built-in 8-band EQ and cabinet model. By routing the clean sound to other tracks on the mixer, you can begin to stack and mix different sounds. Here's what my amp sounds like mixed with Hardcore, where the amp is panned to the left and Hardcore is panned to the right. By stacking these sounds, you can get a nice thick distortion sound. Further combine these sounds with other effects, and we can begin to really give this sound some character. This really brings me to my last thought I would like to impart, and that is that I think of FL Studio as being a sound playground. Just about everything in FL Studio is editable or linkable to a controller, and there are some great built-in controllers to help you build your sounds. If you want a custom LFO that can be assigned to any parameter, then check out Fruity Formula Controller. It has a great Sine LFO preset to help you get started. Assign the control output to an EQ band. You'll have a sweeping bandpass filter much like you can find in many modern synths, but you can assign it to anything. While we are talking about controllers, there are a bunch of fun ones built into FL Studio. We worked with the Peak controller in the previous video. The XY controller is a great little plugin that allows you to link its control output to a game joystick. Now your flight simulator can be a really sick part of your performance. ADSR envelopes are very common in synths. If you're familiar with the ADSR envelope and you want parameters or knobs in FL to be controlled the same way using your keyboard, then check out the Fruity Envelope Controller. It has up to 8 different envelopes and can be assigned and controlled by your keyboard. Along similar lines is the Keyboard Controller. This assigns keys of your keyboard to a value range. If you always want the control value to pop back to a set value, check the Note Off value. When a note is released, it will return to the value set by the slider. Going further, if you have an idea and there isn't a plugin that quite meets your needs, you can dive into bundled software like Flowstone and create something totally unique to you. Again, I would encourage you just to play, experiment, and discover all the ways you can edit, manipulate, and create new sounds. Have fun in the beautiful new FL Studio 12.